All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to go ahead and let a handful more people join, and then we'll get started. Thank you for being patient. Okay, let's get this show on the road. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar entitled Confessions of a SOC Engineer. I'm Shri Sheth, and I'll be your moderator today for this popular event. We're thrilled to announce that we broke our record for number of webinar registrations, so a huge thank you for everyone who is registered and is attending. Okay, let's get started. Just a quick review of our usual housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please type them in on the right-hand area of the GoToWebinar platform, and we will address as many as time permits. I would like to keep this as conversational as possible, so if there are any questions related to the topic at hand, I'll make sure to weave them in. Finally, we are recording this session, and we'll send you an email containing the recording and the product demo links by this Friday. So for those of you who are in EMEA or APAC, stay tuned. Everything is headed your way soon. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers. Please welcome Devin Johnstone. Devin is a Senior Security Operations Engineer in Palo Alto Networks Security Operations Center. In addition to participating in day-to-day incident response activities, tool deployment, and alert deployment, he leads the SOC automation program and DEMISTO deployment. Devin studied information security before building the SOC at the Royal Bank of Canada. Then he joined Palo Alto Networks to do it all again. Devin is passionate about making security easier, faster, and more accessible to all audiences. Our second speaker is Ronald Eddings. Ron is a Silicon Valley-based cybersecurity expert, blogger, he's currently dancing in the room, and digital nomad whose ingenuity, dedication, and ambition have earned him a reputation as a trusted industry leader. Over the course of his career, he has garnered extensive experience working at various Fortune 500 companies and mentoring a multitude of fellow professionals along the way. In addition to cybersecurity, he is well-versed in software development, DevOps, and artificial intelligence. All right, with the intros out of the way, I will turn it over to both Devin and Ron.
Thanks, Shri. I'm going to get started with a little bit about the Palo Alto Networks SOC story, where we came from, where we're going, and how automation fits into all of that. So my first confession is that a couple years ago, Palo Alto Networks did not have a physical SOC yet. We were a couple of information security engineers that were embedded in the IT team. And as the organization has grown, so has our need for automation. So to give you an idea of the size of the environment that we're protecting at Palo Alto Networks SOC, we've got around 6,500 employees now, 20,000 endpoints, and our 13 data centers are in the cloud and on-prem. All of the typical SOC services that we provide to the company: threat monitoring, hunting, incident response. And we are not a services provider, so we are just protecting Palo Alto Networks employees as they do their jobs day to day. So when we were building our SOC, we coined this term, the Legacy SOC, as something we wanted to steer clear from. The Legacy SOC usually falls victim to these three things you see here in front of you. The first is that you turn on all the security tools, and the SOC is just flooded with way too many alerts. And then the SOC engineers, day in and day out, are just closing these alerts, not providing much value to the organization. The other thing with those low fidelity alerts is that those investigations are really time consuming because they contain a lot of repetitive manual tasks, and it's kind of boring for the SOC engineers. That's my second confession for you. We want to be able to provide value back to the organization and not to be stuck in a ticket queue all day. So the impact that these three pillars have on the legacy SOC is that we're missing important stuff that we should be looking at because we're looking at all of these low fidelity alerts. And the SOC team tends to grow. As the volume of alerts grow, we just hire more people instead of figuring out ways to use technology to try and make that easier on us. So Ron, I'm curious, you've talked to a lot of customers. Is this typical of legacy SOCs that you've seen in your experience?
I would say absolutely. There's quite a bit of amazing products that will give us the alerts that we're interested in seeing. But at this point, there's still way too many of them to look at in a manual process. So yeah, the legacy SOC, there wasn't really much automation, and a lot of the investigations were a lot more time consuming.
That's it. That's been my experience too. So going into life before security orchestration, automation, and response software, a couple confessions on what was going on at Palo Networks. When I joined the team, all of our automation in the SOC was custom coded and it wasn't scalable. It hadn't been developed by the SOC engineers. We had some awesome automation developers, but SOC engineers aren't necessarily wicked developers. We have experience in other technical capabilities that we bring to the team, so we weren't able to continue building on that automation. The automation was also heavily focused on analysis, so we were doing a lot of threat intelligence lookups and enrichment, but we weren't getting into the meat of automation, and that's being able to do containment and remediation on the fly during an incident. And the last was that we didn't have any case management where we were able to automate correlation and deduplication of incidents. That was heavily manually developed by just checking every single incident that came in and then matching them up either by manual effort or through those scripts. So it was a long process to be able to handle case management before SOAR. Ron, in your experience, any other life before SOAR confessions that I might have missed here?
I think that case management is the big one. There's a lot of things that we have to do to keep track of the incidents that we're investigating and also the data that's encompassed within them. And a lot of the times we don't necessarily have a place to store it. So I think before SOAR, a lot of the times what I see in many organizations' environments is a lacking of a case management solution, or having a case management solution that's just a bit more rigid, that doesn't allow for opportunity for automation.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So the next slide, we're going to talk about life with SOAR. So now we've been with DEMISTO for a couple months now in Palo Networks SOC. And we were actually able to migrate all of that custom automation that I was talking about we had before SOAR in 3 weeks. And that's because we were able to start using a visual editor and draw instead of custom coding everything. And now all of our SOC engineers are automation developers. If you have an idea of something that we can make easier or faster, we can all log in and build a visual playbook to automate some of those processes. We were also using ServiceNow for case management. And now we've been able to eliminate ServiceNow and our other ticketing systems because DEMISTO specifically has a great case management feature that we're able to develop quickly on our own. And some of our IR workflows, some of our actual incident response workflows in the SOC are now completely automated from start to finish. So all we have to do as the SOC is come in and agree with the tool's analysis and proceed with remediation. And what we've done with all of that free time now with our SOC engineers not having to look at low fidelity alerts all day is we only spend 30% of our time in the ticket queue. We have more time for valuable things like threat hunting. Anything I'm missing, Ron, in your experience at customer sites or in your past life that SOAR has helped change?
I think it's really important to highlight the first bullet. With SOAR, especially with DEMISTO, we're able to take all of that custom automation and provide that in the form of automations in DEMISTO or in the form of integrations in DEMISTO. So any of the existing code that you already have in your environment that's maybe chopping data up and processing information, we could port that over to DEMISTO very painlessly. And I think that the 3 weeks highlight is a very realistic number to have a lot of custom homegrown scripts ported over to DEMISTO. The 30% rule, I love seeing analysts enabled to do their work and also learn on the job. So when you're only spending 30% of your time, I think there's a lot of opportunity to build more sophisticated playbooks, tune things, and really get the case management solution organized like you want it.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really freed up a lot of our time and made being a SOC engineer a lot more fun. So on the next slide, I've just got a brief sampling of some of the playbooks and sub-playbooks that we have built or are currently in our pipeline in Palo Network SOC. So on the left side, we have a whole bunch of high-level playbooks that trigger whenever one of these alert types fires. And then we have all of these sub-playbook actions that we can take. Just to give you a general overview, and we'll dive into some of these use cases later on in the presentation. And now one of the favorite slides for reporting upwards to demonstrate the value of where we're applying automation in the Palo Network SOC. This is a snippet of approximately 3 months of traffic that crosses our network. 100 billion network events that could be attempted connections or users accessing resources throughout their day-to-day business. And 100 million of those are auto-prevented, either using configurations in our security technology or by other automated means, leaving 99 billion events, which we then triggered 2,000 incidents for in the SOC. So things that are actually coming into our ticket queue. Of those 2,000 incidents, 3/4 of them, or approximately 1,500, are automated completely or in some way. So we've been able to leverage automation to impact 75% of our workflow. And we're still working on that last quarter. There's still 500 events approximately that our SOC team still has to walk through to completion. And of those, we've had 0 major incidents. So we're hoping that using automation, we can continue to reflect these numbers going forward.
For some context, the 500, that's per week?
This chart is a 3-month period. So this is what we see overall for 3 months.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you, Devin. That was a really great explanation of PanSOC. I think I wanted to quickly address for people who joined last minute, we are recording this session and we will be providing the slides. And we had a couple questions roll in regarding deduplication and some examples of correlation. And so we will address a handful of those throughout the webinar. And then if not, please remind us again, we'll address it at the end too. All right, I think we want to get rolling into the use cases now, Devin.
Absolutely. So the first use case I have queued up here is case management. So maybe we can address a little bit about that dedupe question. So before we had SOAR, I mentioned we were using ServiceNow to track our security incidents. And that meant we had to ask our ServiceNow developers every time we wanted to make changes, like to add a new field or incorporate a new workflow. And they had a long development cycle. So we were constantly waiting on our developers to update our incident templates. And it's also difficult to automate with SOAR because now you just have another tool that you're trying to stay in sync with. So you're trying to develop automation to go back and forth from a ticketing tool. That back and forth was a non-standard integration. Specifically with ServiceNow, we had the edge proxy set up so that we can encrypt our data at rest. And it was just a lot of back and forth trying to hack together this piecemeal solution. And of course, multiple screens, one of the things that we're trying to eliminate with automation and tool consolidation in the SOC. We typically have a bunch of tabs open and we'd like to eliminate as many of those as possible. Fast forwarding to the future, now that we've got SOAR in our hands, we're able to make instant changes to our case management because we are now the developers. We have that in our hands. It's all in one tool. And DEMISTO also comes with great deduplication and correlation. So to answer one of the questions we've had already, there are the concept of pre-processing rules. So every event that comes into DEMISTO, you can tag it and attach it to another event depending on what's in it. And DEMISTO also does correlation based on indicators. So if you've got all of your data mapped to specific fields, it'll tell you if it's seen the same IP address in a bunch of different places, or even how many times you might have seen it and already closed those incidents off to give you a better picture of your overall scope for your incident. And improved collaboration and tracking of effort. So this was something we were always trying to manually build in ServiceNow. How do we actually track how much time our SOC engineers are spending on specific tasks, and how are they communicating back and forth? So now with DEMISTO, we have the concept of the war room, where we can put all of our incident notes in, view what the other engineers are working on, and also track time spent. And then on the next slide, I actually have an example of how well deduplication is working for us in the SOC. This is a look at a couple-day span where we had almost 1,100 new alerts come into DEMISTO before we deduped them. And DEMISTO closed 859 of those, leaving us with just a 336 created. So we've almost cut it into a third there, how many cases we're actually opening. And that's based on a number of things, both the data in the incident itself, and if we've got any open existing cases for these incidents. I think, Ron, you have some slides on what other customers have done with dedupe and correlation as well, right?
Yeah, these are some great numbers for one, but when it comes to my guilty confession, more often than not, I start with organizations that don't have a case management solution. So getting the cases in DEMISTO is somewhat of a two-step process. One, getting the alert data and then pushing them. But sometimes organizations already do have a case management solution like ServiceNow. So this is an example of a very simple playbook that we put together for an organization that could take multiple types of ServiceNow incidents. So it could take a query from the ServiceNow API. We could also use the built-in integration with DEMISTO to grab incidents, or we could load and parse CSV or JSON files. From there, whether it's an API request or an integration, we'll iterate over each of those ServiceNow tickets. And at the bottom, we could see that the playbook then creates a new incident in DEMISTO if that incident isn't already present. So this shows some of the simplicity that can exist when it comes to incident migration.
And we had a question on the line around deduping Proofpoint events. We are a Proofpoint customer and we use them for our email security, specifically related to Proofpoint tab. When you have a campaign that happens and a bunch of users either click or a bunch of users receive, how we correlate those is based on the recipient, because the recipient defines how many hosts we might have to reimage if they actually get infected. So we actually leave Proofpoint cases separate because we want to work each individual user. However, we still correlate them so that when the first one comes in, we can see in the DEMISTO incident, hey, I've also got these other dozen cases that are related to this same campaign. So it really comes down to how you want to handle the response to that as an organization. You can choose to have that as one ticket if you like. We just choose to keep them separate because we might need to track the resolution at different speeds for those users. And I think we're going to hop into the next use case, which is phishing. I've got another confession for you. This was the Palo Network SOC engineer's least favorite use case pre-automation. There was a lot of manual work involved in phishing. Our employees send us lots of spam and lots of phishing that we had to analyze and determine if it was malicious or not. That was step one when you have a phishing case. Is this email actually nasty? Do I actually have to go and yank it from everyone's mailboxes? If users had fallen victim to that phishing attack, we could have been doing any of those manual tasks you see there pre-SOAR. We were probably spending on average 45 minutes per phishing case, and we have 9 full-time SOC engineers. So doing that math, we were spending almost 2 days each a month working on phishing. The team did not enjoy that. But now with SOAR, we've managed to completely automate away our phishing work, freeing up that time for them to do more work, but more diverse work. So now the phishing case comes in, DEMISTO actually goes out and does all of our threat intelligence lookups from the sources we've specified and determines whether the email is malicious. So all the SOC engineer needs to do is agree with the tool and say, yes, it is, or no, it's not, and can kick off all of these other reimage tasks. These remediation tasks, including submitting a reimage request to the IT help desk to get their computer wiped. So now we spend less than 5 minutes per phishing incident. It's really just going in and getting the tool, the approval to continue. And I could see one day in the future where we don't even look at those anymore once we've seen a trend of DEMISTO being accurate, then we're going to start trusting it more. The accuracy is also going to improve over time with machine learning as our SOC engineers start to close cases and say, yes, this was a actually malicious email, or no, it was not. DEMISTO is going to start to use that in determining going forward its analysis of cases. So that was one big change we had with phishing, the one that probably provided the most impact to our SOC right off the bat. I hear this from a lot of customers too, Ron. Phishing is their least favorite case. What have you seen?
Yeah, phishing is the least favorite. It's very noisy, and with more so the legacy SOC, there's not really many ways to correlate information to things that have happened in the past. So some of these metrics that you're providing here, I would strongly kind of lean towards them, and we could probably even tune them to be even even more of a highlight. So 45 minutes per incident, that's a great start. Maybe there's an opportunity to decrease the manual task in phishing investigations and then decrease that average time to 30 minutes. So what I see a lot of the times before SOAR, one of the guilty confessions is the lack of correlation, the lack of threat intel, the lack of seeing if this is a duplicate or a false positive. But with SOAR, at least we have the ability to have that data all in one place and present it to see maybe if there is some malicious activity around that indicator, or if this was a phishing event that was seen in the past.
Awesome. And I think you have an example from some customer sites.
Yes. So these are real world examples of what SOAR can provide us. So just onboarding your phishing investigations, you're going to notice how many phishing events that you truly get per week or per month. And that's a really important thing to highlight, just because that can create an opportunity to create more of a need for headcount, so on and so forth. But if we look at the right, we can see that the example in this environment, the customer onboarded more use cases. They onboarded more incident types. So naturally, they saw more incidents occur per week. But the really amazing thing to see at the bottom is that we can see the mean time to resolve is starting to decrease and ultimately move towards zero. A lot of these investigations are repetitive or really non-legitimate. Let's go to the next slide. And in the next one, this is another example from a different customer. And this shows just the sheer amount of types of phishing events that you can have. So some of these phishing events are classified as legit, some are classified as phish, so on and so forth. So highlighting what kind of closure types that you have and how frequently they're seen can really help the analyst focus in on a specific type of incident, or maybe focus less on this incident type if the majority of it is really just spam or legit. And we have one more image here also. So this is another dashboard image from another customer. So this is 3 at this point. And this shows the amount of automations that the playbooks have run against incidents. So at the bottom, we can see that this was the majority of the playbooks that have run were an enrichment playbook. So this could show the value of just how important enriching data is in general. If we have IPs or even usernames, why not go to Active Directory and get some enrichment, see who the user is, see which organization they belong to or which department they belong to, and then you could start to specify and focus in on specific campaigns. If there's a specific department that's seeing a lot of specific subjects, then you can marry that data and start to understand who in your organization is being targeted. And for the next one, we actually have another use case, which is incident handling. I have seen quite a few pre-SOAR and with SOAR changes when it comes to incident handling. So we were just talking about phishing, and phishing is an incident type. But what about when we onboard new incident types, when we don't have playbooks or processes defined to triage that type of incident? We need some type of process to generically handle incident data when there's malicious artifacts found or new alerts are starting to trigger information that's seen in our environment. So before SOAR, the guilty confession that I must make was I was a threat intel analyst, and there wasn't really good processes that I could provide my SOC analysts. So when I would give them information, they would have a hard time following what to do with that information. What SOAR and DEMISTO provides is a graphical way to represent the steps that an analyst should take when triaging any specific type of incident. So we might have a playbook specified for a type like phishing, but we might have a generic incident handling playbook. Devin, what kind of struggles have you all had when it comes to handling new alerts or new incident types?
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of customer management that has to go on, and getting the teams to sit down and go, all right, what are all the things that we're going to want to automate in this step? First step is mapping the fields and getting data into the tool, but then what do we want to do with it? And that's always best to just lay down right at the beginning so that you're not duplicating effort as you start to rush towards automation. So definitely clarifying expectations and making sure we understand the use case before jumping ahead with ingesting new incident types.
Absolutely. So what I have in the next slides are just the transition. This is going to tell the story of building playbooks in DEMISTO and also creating a graphical way to handle incident types. So if we look at this specific playbook, there's a few tasks in here that there's no lightning bolt or sub playbook next to. So those are manual tasks, and that's a task that's going to require manual input by an analyst. And in this situation, the evolution was performed on a customer that was using a different case management solution. So what we first had to do was manually provide the incident number that was in that external tool, then perform some type of investigation. So if there's indicators or just an alert description, the analyst is expected to investigate, enrich, and provide their input. And then at the end of this playbook, we can see that there's a few options to classify this alert as, or this incident as, false positive, resolve, duplicate, or other. So based off of that analyst input dictates as to how that case is going to be closed in the external case management tool. So this is a playbook that doesn't have that much enrichment or that much customization. If we go to the next slide, we're going to see the second iteration of this playbook. We already talked a bit about deduping. Well, we also have playbooks out of the box and that I've seen customized quite a bit for deduping incidents, whether it's based off of incident fields or even machine learning. As you onboard more incidents in DEMISTO, DEMISTO can start to make predictions as to which ones might be duplicates. And then also the customer has then added some more indicator and user extraction steps. So having these custom steps or out-of-the-box steps really give you that granular details about the who, what, when, where, and maybe even the why of an incident. Still same closure process, but the next playbook is the last version that we really put a lot of work into, and it's in the next slide. Here it is. So we can see that in this version of the playbook, we separated the incident out into phases. So whether this is a specific incident type or a new generic alert that we're working on, we have specific phases that we expect an analyst to operate in. So this is based off of a specific standard, and the phases are preparation, identification, containment, eradication, and recovery. After each of these steps are completed, we can move on to the next. So for example, if there's specific enrichment steps, they're performed in the identification phase. And if there is any need to contain or eradicate or recover, the playbook is going to move to those steps next. And there are some automations. So this could be a great blend between automation and manual intervention by analysts broken out into phases.
That's a great example. Thanks, Ron. I also have another example where there is some more decision making to be done by the engineer. It's not so straightforward as phishing was, where it's a true positive or false positive. Windows events, there's many different types of administrative activities that the SOC would want to be aware of. And usually for many of these, the first thing we want to do is ask the user, were you aware that your account was being used for this activity? And then depending on what their answer is, we may want to trigger off further investigation. But in terms of reaching out to the user for that initial step and saying, hey, your account did this, there's a bit more decision making that had to be done in our playbook. So in the next slide, I'll show you what the overarching Windows event playbook looks like for the Palo Network SOC. It's pretty straightforward. We've got a number of actions that happen when the incident gets triggered. We do a bit of enrichment, and then the actual meat of what happens in this playbook happens in our analysis sub-playbook. And I'll hop over to the next slide and dive into the analysis that we do on the Windows event. So there's a few things we want to determine up front. Is this a service account or a privileged user? If it's a service account, well, we may not know who the owner is, and we'll have to reach out to somebody in IT manually to do some digging. But if they're a privileged user, that might be a case where we want to trigger a page to the SOC, make it a bit more urgent than just your run-of-the-mill ticket. If it's neither of those, then we can get down into reaching out to the user to start off this incidence analysis. So the first thing we do is decide whether is this a user activity or a suspicious connection event. And that way we can set a problem. You see down there at the bottom of the first screenshot, we have two use cases for a local administrator account being created and then a user also being added to another privileged group. And once we tell DEMISTO that's what the problem is that we've identified, down into the next slide on the right side of the screen, you can see we send the email to the user for more information, just asking them, your account was used for this activity. Were you aware? Is there an approved change? Something that we should know. And then we can get that response back. And right now, nothing actually happens automatically because we want our SOC engineers still to come in and verify the user's response and go from there. But if your organization was comfortable enough, you could automate the rest of this and close the case off. So it really depends on what your risk tolerance is for activities like that. So to sum up, we promised the good, the bad, and the ugly. So here it is in as few words as possible. So the good, and my confessions with the good of SOAR has been that the benefits are far-reaching and they're easy to demonstrate. You can spend a couple weeks building a playbook, take 2 days back from your SOC engineers, and they can see that value right away. It's quick and high impact. The bad is that there's always going to be those people who are a little resistant to change. They like the way they were doing things. They like their old ticketing system. Those people are going to take some convincing, but those people exist everywhere, and with the right amount of training and support, they can be turned. And then the ugly. We also have reliance on a lot of partners when we're setting up SOAR. You need to get API keys. You need to set up integrations. You need to get access to other platforms and services. And even at Palo Alto Networks, where security is at the front of our minds, we still have to do a bit of convincing to get us access into different applications. And so, of course, we can't automate those until we're connected to them. So there's always going to be a bit of legwork to be done, but with the right team and the right mindset, you can achieve it. And so I don't want to be the only one to air my dirty laundry, so I'm going to ask Ron, what's your good, bad, and ugly confession?
So coming from an unbiased perspective, there's no bad in SOAR.
Says the DEMISTO customer success engineer.
Yes, says the guy who is working with all the customers, trying to make them happy. So in all fairness and all reality, there's a lot of great things that can happen when we implement SOAR. And I think the biggest thing is innovation. We're allowing the SOC analysts or the SOC engineers we enable them to start innovating and coming up with new logic to detect bad or malicious artifacts, and also to new logic to even find new artifacts. So that's really impressive. What I've seen as far as the bad and the ugly is the customization. A lot of tools are now expert systems. There's a lot of customization that you can do and perform. So what I've seen to be a little bad and a little ugly is just how much customization has gone on without using some of the things that come out of the box. So maybe writing a custom script that that splits a data based off of a comma. Doing that in a script is just one more piece of code to maintain. I wouldn't recommend it. So that's really the bad and the ugly, but the enablement, that's the beauty.
That's it, yeah. The other thing I would add is that you're going to need to dedicate someone who's willing to be the champion for SOAR. There is going to be a learning curve with seeing a SOAR tool for the first time. A lot of security professionals have been around firewalls for a while. We've all seen endpoint protection agents and IDS, IPS, but a lot of folks haven't seen a SOAR tool yet. So you're going to need to understand that there's going to be a learning curve, but with any great learning curve comes a lot of positive results. So with that, I'm going to move on to the top 5 tips that I think will help you achieve those positive results with SOAR. And the first I alluded to earlier is documenting the use cases and requirements up front. you'll notice that when you start to build, you can repeat a lot of the automations that you've already created, sub-playbooks and scripts and things like that. So if you have got it all written down, you can kind of draw this brain map of automations that you will be able to reuse, and that'll help speed up the overall rollout. The second is the point I just mentioned about dedicating resources. Assign someone on the team the position to champion automation. Give them the appropriate resources, get them to engage with customer success, point number 3, and get them to really learn it inside out so that they can be a champion for it and help share the skills that they've gained with the rest of the team. The fourth is prioritize. So when we were starting to build our automation, the SOC team said, let's automate phishing first because they knew it would save the most time. So take those use cases that are going to be the easiest to accomplish, but also have the greatest impact. So you can quickly demonstrate the value of SOAR and be able to communicate future need for it. And the last is change management. When you have a bunch of new developers all in the tool for the first time, it's going to be important to set your ground rules, when changes can be pushed, what changes can be made. Because once your SOC starts relying on automation for things like alerting, you are operating a critical function. So you want to make sure that changes are being properly reviewed. But we accomplish that by setting up a separate dev and production environment, kind of making the dev environment the playground for the SOC engineers, if you will.
Yeah, these are awesome tips, and I wouldn't want to change any of them. If I had to add in my own tip, what I would say is iterate. So you can dedicate the resources and prioritize, but remember that fighting threats is not a one-time thing. It's a constant battle. So we're going to have to change the playbooks. We're going to have to change the incident fields that we're storing. Products, services, and APIs are constantly evolving. So just evolving with the capabilities that you have at your disposal is very important in the iteration process.
Absolutely, I completely agree. Looking forward, so we have some other use cases here that we've both heard about or seen ourselves. Other applications for SOAR just outside of your regular run-of-the-mill SOC or security incidents. Here at Palo Alto Networks, we do an extensive red team, blue team program. So if you haven't heard of this arrangement yet, the blue team is the defenders or the security operations center, whoever's responsible for monitoring. And the red team is the theoretical attacker. Sometimes this is an outside penetration testing firm, or at Palo Alto Networks, we actually have full-time employees who are part of the red team. They sit in another building and they conduct covert attacks on our defenses, and it's the SOC's job to detect them. And that way we can test how all our defenses are working. That's the purple teaming aspect where we combine those forces. So we've also seen DEMISTO start to being used in the red team, blue team exercises. You can get DEMISTO to trigger malicious attacks, just like you can detecting things that have already happened. So that whole cycle of submit the attack, detect the attack, determine if your defenses are working is another great use case. Hunting, so now that we've freed up all of our time with the automation, our SOC engineers now can do structured hunts using attack techniques, and the DEMISTO platform can go and trigger those reminders to them that it's time to complete their hunt and even perform the hunt for them, going into certain systems, looking for evidence of a certain attack, looking for IOCs. That's another great area we've started to expand automation into besides just the security incidents. As part of our information security team, we also have vulnerability management, who is putting their vulnerability management records into DEMISTO and having it go out and do the reminders to platform owners to please fix your vulnerability. It's also great as a reminder tool, and DBot, I think, is a little scarier when they get a message from DBot than from our team. So it helps push things along a little bit. GRC is the same, so they have to do risk acceptance, and they have to do governance and compliance activities within the organization that require input from other stakeholders, so they can put it in there and get DEMISTO to do the back and forth with users in the teams. And the last one I actually heard, this one from DEMISTO. I heard that before DEMISTO joined Palo Alto Networks, they were actually onboarding staff in the HR department using DEMISTO.
This was, I think, one of our most used playbooks, and actually one of the most bang for buck playbooks. It's a huge amount of manual steps to onboard an employee, get them the right access and Also, even order them a laptop or submit the email to the person that's going to order the laptop. So just being able to automate all of those steps was really great.
We have other customers who are doing this too, though. It wasn't just us. That's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, and now we're sharing kind of our strategies with other customers. Another use case that I don't see listed here that we've decided to automate was the provisioning and deployment of cloud instances. So we have a lot of things that we do in the cloud. I know I need there's a lot of times where I need a training environment, but I don't necessarily want to load all that data back in and have to spin up a new server in AWS or GCP. So what we do is playbooks that build those environments for us, and it works great.
That's an awesome one. Yeah, our IT team here at Palo Networks has also started using it for things like asset management. Just these use cases beyond just security incidents. If you are in a role that requires the use of technology that has an API, and you normally do those tasks with your fingers, you'll probably find a way to get SOAR to do it for you too.
Nice. Anything else, gentlemen?
That's all I've got. I'm excited to hear some questions.
Yeah, so we have a lot going on. Thank you both for showing what it's like to implement SOAR before and after. For everybody listening, I hope you found some valuable components that Devin and Ron mentioned that you guys can relate to. Before we jump into questions, I wanted to touch base on a couple of resources. We have the Dummies Guide that gives you an overview of SOAR and all its benefits. Gartner recently released their SOAR market guide, and we're very honored to have had a valuable mention there. So take a look at that. You can also download the report there, as well as a free version of the products. You can get some hands-on experience. And then coming soon. So we have a new product release headed your way. So keep an eye out for 5.0 early October. We're pretty excited for that. Before we dive into a few of the more deeper questions, there were a few simple ones that I wanted to address. So one person asked if DEMISTO supported multi-tenancy and MSSP. The answer there is yes. Someone else asked if we could do a live run of a playbook, and more than happy to jump into the product and show you guys that after we're done addressing the other questions, because there are a lot that were flowing in. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me see. We took care of the deduplication correlation. This person is asking, how do you perform threat hunting and post-successful orchestration of low fidelity tasks? I think this was targeted towards you, Devin.
Sure, yeah, so two parts to this. Threat hunting, right now, our SOC engineers, we have a bi-weekly schedule where we'll just randomly assign a structured or unstructured hunt. And by structured or unstructured, I mean that we've gone through and defined a list of attack techniques, tactics, or procedures from the MITRE ATT&CK framework, things that we should be able to detect or see in our technology. And so we have a list of these cases, and the SOC engineers will pick up a couple every 2 weeks and will be assigned to go out and try to find evidence of this occurring in our platforms. It typically starts with a hypothesis, something like, I think I can find X. And then we'll go out and we'll either prove or disprove that we can find this in our environment. So we track how often we go out and we actually find something evil, or that we go out and we don't find something evil. Because if we're going and doing this hunt on a regular basis, and we're always finding evil in this certain system, that's a great alert. That's something that we want to see all the time. So we'll actually make that an alert so that it comes into the ticket queue and that we see it every time. But the hunts, we only expect to find evil maybe 30 to 50% of the time. So how we're tracking those is actually in Jira. So we have a Jira table with all of our hunts, and then every time the SOC engineer runs through one of those, they track whether or not it was a good one or a less accurate one. And then the same with the alerts. I think the second part of that question was related to tracking the alert fidelity. If we could jump back to it. We're just looking for your question here. And low fidelity tasks. So the same thing with our alerts. DEMISTO is tracking whenever we select in our close notes that this was a true or false positive detection. So we have all of those metrics that we're then pushing from DEMISTO back into Jira, so we can generate these fancy reports on which alerts are doing great and which hunts are doing great. And because we have the time now, we can actually go back and do iterations of those, make them better over time. So I hope that answers the alert fidelity question.
Thanks, Devin. Ron, I'm going to punt this one over to you. In terms of collaboration, what kind of collaboration have you seen across different teams? I think this is related more to the war room and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of collaboration opportunities in DEMISTO, and one of our core competencies really is chat ops. So we provide a lot of opportunity for analysts to have a single place to look at artifacts and notes and evidence in our war room, but also an opportunity to chat and invite other analysts to view what they've been working on or seek out feedback and even opportunities for peer review. But DEMISTO isn't the only place where you can have your war room. You can also have your war room over Slack, email, and now in 5.0, even Microsoft Teams. So we've really opened up the ability to perform chat ops and your investigations.
Awesome, thank you. This next question is related to the asker's specific SOC. So he's saying that our process is for the SOC engineer to look at the events in USM anywhere, and from there create incidents in ServiceNow. He's asking, in this specific scenario, how would the workflow work? Sounds like a fun question.
Yeah, so in most cases, DEMISTO would be kind of in the middle of those two. DEMISTO would be fetching from that data source, then going out to other data sources in the playbook, or maybe even in pre-processing and enriching that data. After the data is enriched, an analyst could choose to work that case inside DEMISTO, and that would be my recommendation, because that's where all the power is at for enriching and providing information about that case. And then at the end, what we can do for updating an external case management tool is we have the ability to post-process. So we can take all of the alert data that is within DEMISTO that's based off of that incident. And when we close out that investigation, we can have it automatically update and close out that incident in the external case management tool.
Oh, nice. Devin, I think this one was kind of targeted towards you. So this person's asking, how are you quarantining emails? Is it via AWS integration? And would that quarantine all of the same emails from all mailboxes if the sender sent it to, let's say, 100 mailboxes, but only one person actually reported it?
Great question. So we were previously an Office 365 customer, and how quarantining emails worked then was we had to run a compliance search to collect all of the emails. And this was a tricky part, was the search only could return the results that you wanted to quarantine. So if your search was slightly off and you got an extra email in there, there was no way to just say, I don't want to quarantine that email. So that search was the step one with Microsoft. So what we do with DEMISTO is kick off that search so that by the time I get in there as a SOC engineer, the search is done and I can verify that the list of emails that it's come back with are the ones that I want to quarantine. And then it's just a matter of saying, yes, those are the correct ones. Go ahead and submit that quarantine task. That works differently with every email provider. So depending on how you quarantine emails with that email provider, usually we have an integration already in DEMISTO. So if you're on Office 365 or Exchange, or if you're using Gmail like we are now at Palo Networks, you have an integration where all of those actions are already built in. So you don't have to figure out how that's going to work. You usually just go into your playbook and create a task for that email integration and say, quarantine, away it goes.
Nice, thank you. This next question is targeted towards one of those tips that you gave, which was kind of creating your key DEMISTO champion. So this person's asking, how can everyone be involved in maximizing the outcome instead of dedicating it to one champion?
Sure, yeah. I think the one champion is to get the ball rolling at the beginning. When you're onboarding a new service or a new tool, and some other SOC engineers can probably relate to this, when you've got 3 different people working on it, but they're only looking at it for 20% of their day because they're also trying to run the SOC, it moves forward very slowly. So the one champion idea is designed to help you accelerate the automation, get one person super involved so that they can sit with customer success every day if they need to learn how the tool works. And then that person can be the champion within your team to help share that knowledge with the rest of the team. That's been a point of structure that we've built into the Palo Alto Networks SOC, is that everybody kind of takes a lead on a certain tool or a certain platform. DEMISTO just happens to be mine and leading how we do automation. And that just helps me really deep dive and focus on it so that then I have the capability to share that with everyone else rather than a bunch of us trying to tackle it up front. But I do highly recommend that you do get everyone on board, like the asker is suggesting. Make everyone a champion eventually. But to get you started, pick one person who's really eager to learn a new tool and get them to be the mover for change.
Perfect, thank you. Ron, this next question I think I'm going to give to you. I just decided. With other corporate teams wanting to use DEMISTO for their use cases, Is a separate environment needed, or does role-based access keep security safe?
Role-based access is the best way to go. We also, like one of the questions mentioned, we also do have multi-tenant if there is some very unique and sensitive use cases there. But for the most part, roles work great, and we can also map roles from Active Directory right into DEMISTO, and we could use any SAML provider too. Any provider that's using SAML 2.0 or later would work great for adding in users and marrying the roles for those users.
Perfect, thank you. And then somebody asked if there was going to be a replay of these slides, so we'll be sending out the recording so you don't have to worry there, as well as a hard copy of the slides. And they're asking if the playbooks are shareable, and yeah, they are, because we're already publicly sharing them. So
yeah, some of the ones that we've been developing internally actually have appeared in content releases. I notice sometimes I make a playbook and then DEMISTO releases it with the next content pack. So some of them you may already have without knowing it.
Cool. This one is related to you, Devin. Did you guys assess the differences between the ServiceNow security module and DEMISTO SOAR?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were using ServiceNow security incident module. The problem with us was ServiceNow is got a whole heck of a more difficult development procedure. You really need ServiceNow developers who know the platform in and out. With us, it was just easier to put it inside one place rather than having two separate platforms.
Perfect, thank you. And then related to these use cases, are there built-in use cases that we can use, or is there a capability to create new use cases required? The answer is yes. DEMISTO comes with multiple out-of-the-box playbooks, and each of them are customizable to your specific needs there. Ron, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of reiterate that. We have quite a few kind of generic playbooks for specific use cases, phishing, malware, and even blocking indicators at a specific endpoint level or even firewall level. So quite a bit of things that you can leverage today out of the box, and even things that you can leverage to build upon.
Awesome, thank you. This is a really long question, and I think maybe after this one we jump into that live playbook, Ron. I know that Ron pulled up a playbook for you guys. We can kind of jump to the product right after this. This person's asking, we're an MSSP and are using a SIM. How will DEMISTO work for us here? Is it an independent platform? Do we have to forward logs from SIM to DEMISTO, or do we have to configure log sources from multiple clients into DEMISTO system, or do we have to replace the SIM with DEMISTO?
So I can provide some context to that question. So what DEMISTO is great at is integrations. So DEMISTO can integrate with SIMs, it can integrate with your endpoint solution, and whatever other solution you have in your environment, assuming that it has some type of API that you can interface with. So since that's the case, you have two options. You can send incidents from your SIM into DEMISTO, or what works better is having DEMISTO pull directly from your SIM. So based off of your SIM, we can fetch in periodic intervals, and we can even specify the type of query that we want to perform against the SIM to only pull the relevant information. So if you have multiple clients that are going to be sending their data to DEMISTO and your MSSP, it's typically a multi-tenant environment, and one tenant is going to be pointed at a specific index of your SIM or an entirely different SIM focused on that specific customer.
Nice, thanks, Ron. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen with you, so now you can go ahead and show that live playbook, and then right after that, we can go ahead and continue to address the questions with the remaining time.
Sure.
Okay.
All right.
Nice.
Here is my screen, and this is DEMISTO version 4.5. We have a new version coming out end of this month, early next month. That's going to have a lot of great new features, but there's already a lot of amazing things in here today. So what I have are some email samples from malware traffic analysis. They have some suspicious attachments, and they should have some malicious indicators. Some don't have attachments, but let's just keep that in mind. But either way, this was forwarded by a phishing button and then pushed into DEMISTO that's monitoring a specific mailbox. So once we click on investigate, if the playbook is not set to run automatically, what happens first are indicators are extracted in the background. And while the indicators are being extracted, they're also being enriched by whatever threat intel reputation source that we have enabled. So at this point, indicators are going to be presented in the summary page. And currently, the playbook is opening up the .eml file that was produced as part of clicking that phishing button. From there, after the email is parsed through, ripped out for indicators, and even analyzed for attachments, we are going to be sending any suspicious or non-suspicious artifacts to our sandbox. So after the EML is processed, we can review what was the input of this specific automation step and what was the output. So it's really intuitive and easy to understand why output or results are formatted in a specific way. And the beauty of this playbook is it also attached an image for us so we can see what the contents of that email look like. This is already looking suspicious because this is just an email that has regards and then a name. So that would already kind of give an analyst some suspicion, but the sandboxes that are enabled are also going to help us out. So here I have Wildfire enabled for us. That's going to look at any attachments that came from that .eml file. We see that there was a PDF file attached, and Wildfire had some information about it that we can view in our indicators page or even in our summary page. So scrolling down, there were some more steps that occurred in this playbook. We've calculated severity. We've also assigned to an analyst based off of roles. So that gives us some insight that we can automatically assign to an analyst based off of a specific DEMISTO role. And since this email did have malicious artifacts within it, it went down this malicious step. So in the playbook, we even have a step to see, were there any malicious artifacts? If there are, we know 100% of the time that we're going to want to manually look at it and possibly eradicate that threat. But before we jump back into more questions, let's take a quick look at the indicators that were extracted. So we mentioned during the presentation that threat intel is a huge issue when it comes to case management, and just having that data as another reference point to look at and understand what's bad and what's good. But nonetheless, we have that present right here in the summary page in DEMISTO, and we can view all of the indicators that were within the EML file or that were in that PDF file, and also see what threat intel reputation services said about those specific indicators. So if we look at this hash, we can observe that Wildfire and both reversing labs both indicated that this indicator was bad. Oops, let's go back. That the indicator was bad, and we could also see it by clicking on either of these sources exactly what the source said about the indicator. The last thing is a lot of the times re-enrichment is also a pain point. Well, in DEMISTO, if we click on an indicator, we can easily click on actions and click on recalculate to get a fresh and up-to-date source and reputation classification about said indicator.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. I hope that kind of gives you an idea of the product if you haven't seen it already. Pretty exciting stuff. Okay, looks like our slides disappeared on us. Never fear. And we get to go all the way to the bottom.
Yes, the best part.
Yeah.
Let's get started.
Okay. Let's get maybe one or two questions in, and then we can set you guys out. Yeah. This person is asking, indicators will time out in 72 hours by default. Will they also refresh it if they're referenced 72 hours after they were first seen?
Yeah, so DEMISTO does have a timeout that can be customized for the result of specific reputation sources. Will they auto refresh after the 72 hours? Yes, assuming that they're seen again. If they weren't seen again, then they're not going to automatically refresh. And just so we don't overly use the API service that we are pulling threat intel from, but what I've seen and what I've implemented are playbooks that will go over stale indicators in the form of a job and re-enrich them.
Yeah, I'd have to say from our perspective too, you can customize that. Palo Networks, we decided we want to pull that every single time. We just want the most updated. So that is entirely up to you what you choose to do.
Okay, cool. We just hit our time, and I don't want to go ahead and worry about everybody getting kicked off. So we'll just kind of quickly wrap up. If there are extra questions, no worries. I'll be sending you the recording and the slides, and if we haven't addressed your question, feel free to respond to my email and we'll take care of it there. I just wanted to say a huge thank you. So thank you, Ron and Devin.
Thanks for having me.
This was amazing. I'd like to thank our presenters, Ron, Devin, the audience as well for joining us today. Please take a look at some of our supporting resources, and of course, keep an eye out for that recording and the slides. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we're looking forward to working with you all in 2019. All right, thank you.